Last time we were together, we were looking at the idea of an ape man, saw that there is no such thing. Caveman, well, yeah, there were cavemen, just like there's castle man, teepee man, all the rest. But it's not an ancestor of the human race. It's sort of ape-like. In addition to looking at prehistoric times, we looked at the idea of the ice ages, and see that the evidence indicates that there were not multiple ice ages lasting thousands of years, but there was simply one ice age that occurred after the worldwide flood, and it seemed to cover this area. So you can see that the glaciers of the ice sheets covered Ohio and much of the northeastern United States. One of the and there are evidences of that in our area, from place to place. One of the best places to see evidence of the grooves made by glaciers is on Kelly's Island, up in Lake Erie. Anybody ever been to Kelly's Island? No, it's a neat place. It's a nice island. It's got lots of stuff to do. Nice place to go. But there's this area where you can stand and see the huge rock formation there and the grooves that were made by the ice just coming down through that and then building up what it had taken away from the rocks. So that ice age occurred due to conditions following the flood, and then eventually that ice backed off, as you will realize. That may not have been the first ice age, though. That was probably the first ice age, and we've had many of those since. Just talk to your parents and see if that's not the case. Right. Another question that comes up concerning prehistoric times is, probably the number one question is, what about the dinosaurs? Anytime you talk about a biblical view of history, people want to know what happened to the dinosaurs. How many of you had Mrs. Henry in first grade? Only about 3 of you. 4? See if you remember her asking this question, because she used to do it in first grade. Did dinosaurs and people live at the same time, or did they live together? I don't know if you remember that question or not, but she said most of the time first graders would say no, because by first grade they've already been indoctrinated with evolutionary thinking to believe that dinosaurs and people did not coexist. But we know that they had to have, as she pointed out to you as first graders. Maybe you don't remember, but she did, and asked the question, when were dinosaurs created? And I'll ask you the question, when were dinosaurs created? What day was that when he created the land animals? 6 is when he created the land animals. Now some of the dinosaurs might fit into sea creatures, things like that. And when did he create man? Day 6. So they both created the same day, at least for the most part. So did dinosaurs and humans live at the same time? Yeah, they had to have, because we know what happened at the very beginning of time, and that's creation, and Adam was certainly there then. At creation, dinosaurs lived then. There was not some pre-existent earth upon which dinosaurs lived, nor were there billions of years during which dinosaurs lived before man came on the scene. That doesn't fit the biblical account and doesn't fit the scientific account either, if you're looking at true science, not stuff that's made up. So man and dinosaurs did live at the same time. There's lots of evidence for that. We're going to look at some of that today. What about the Bible? Somebody says, well, why are dinosaurs mentioned in the Bible then, if they lived with man? What would you say to that? Bill?
They didn't invent the word dinosaur until like the 1800s.
Exactly. The word wasn't invented yet. How would it be there? And in fact, people before the 1800s, if they were talking about dinosaurs, if they saw a dinosaur, what would they have called it? Now we'll come back to that in a minute. Let's get back to the Bible. The Bible does talk about some dinosaurs, I believe, and some of you are probably familiar with this. In the book of Job, chapter 40, it describes the behemoth. Eats grass as an ox. His strength is in his loins. His force is in the navel of his belly. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. Now, some Bibles will have a note at the bottom saying the behemoth is possibly an elephant or a hippopotamus. A tail like a cedar? For an elephant or hippopotamus? That doesn't make sense, does it? But what does it sound like? It sounds like a dinosaur. It fits the description exactly. And so we have that description given to us in the book of Job. Also in the book of Job, we have described Leviathan. And if you read the description there, it sounds like what used to be called a sea monster, a sea creature, maybe even a plesiosaur. If you think of one that looks like the Loch Ness Monster, that's a plesiosaur. So those two are described in the book of Job. And they fit the description of a dinosaur. But that's not the only place that we find dinosaurs. We find them also in ancient cultures. Only, of course, they didn't use the word dinosaur. If they used a word in English, a word we use in English anyway, what word would it have been? It would have been the word dragon. That's what they called dinosaurs before the word dinosaur was invented. They were called dragons. And we have lots of indications of this throughout a lot of cultures. Notice this doorway to a Cambodian temple. I don't know if you can see or not this figure. Can you tell what that is? This temple, by the way, was used in the first Laura Croft movie, if you saw. Here, now can you tell what it is?
Dinosaur?
Yeah, what kind? What? A stegosaurus. See the plates on the back? Now, these people had never gone to a museum and seen a skeleton of a stegosaurus put together. How did they know how to make this figure? Because they saw one. That's the only way they could have known. In Mexico, the radiocarbon dates of these dates up to 4500 BC. Now we know that radiocarbon dating is not really very accurate over 3,000 years, so it could be more recent than that even, but still ancient times. And you can see that this first figure here is a figure of an Apatosaurus. Over here's an iguanodon. And you can see the figures here look like several different kinds of dinosaurs, as well as this one is a typical image of a dinosaur. Well, you know, this was thousands of years ago that these people made these models. Here's a tapestry found in Peru. See the dinosaurs along here? Those are dinosaurs. It doesn't fit any other creature. These are living dinosaurs that are depicted in their tapestry. Also, we see dinosaurs depicted in their pottery. There's no doubt about that, is there? That that's a dinosaur or a dragon. So these awesome creatures must have been alive when these ancient Peruvians saw them and depicted them on their pottery. There's another one. Triceratops. Another piece of pottery. We have an Allosaurus. It's pretty fearsome, doesn't it? So looks this is that, I don't know if that's a person or not, but it's getting attacked by both sides. There's a man and a Diplodocus pictured on pottery. Now this is in the Natural Bridges National Monument, and it's a little bit hard to see, but here's a man, and down here is a dinosaur drawn on the side of this wall. Wasn't done just last year. This dates to somewhere between 400 and 1300 AD. Now this is a drawing done by an artist from what someone described to him. And he had never seen this, didn't know what a plesiosaur was, didn't know what one looked like. And the people that told him about it had never heard of a plesiosaur and didn't know what one looked like. But he drew what they described to him, and it looks like a plesiosaur. This is in Australia, Aborigines in Australia. It's a very interesting thing, and if we are able to see the movie, this will come up in the movie later. This is an image from Bishop Bell's tomb in Westminster Abbey. Now, Westminster Abbey has a lot of tombs of a lot of famous people. This particular tomb, and this is just a part of the whole engraving that's on the floor of Westminster Abbey, but they've got it covered with a huge rug. And so you can't see it unless you have special permission, I guess, to look at it. But obviously, engraved on this tomb of Bishop Bell are two dinosaurs. I don't know if you can see, but their necks are intertwined, which may be a mating ritual, maybe the way they fought. You don't really know for sure, but there's little doubt that these are some kind of dinosaur. Although the people, the curator of the museum and so on deny, they say it's not a dinosaur. Looks like a dinosaur, but it's not really. Why? Because they don't believe that it's possible that it could have been. Yeah.
What animal do they believe it to be?
A mythical creature. Somebody made it up. So even though the other creatures that are pictured are all real, they just made up that one. Now, when we think of dragons, we got to think dinosaur. And when you read stories about dragons in that are legends, things like that, I'm finding more and more that when I read stories that are passed down from generation to generation or read the legends, that those are probably based on something that really happened. They may have been embellished, but there's some truth there somewhere. And so I think a lot of these stories that we have maybe read concerning dragons are based on reality. So when you think of dragon, don't think this. It's not a pretend cartoon figure. They're real. This picture shows dragons in picture and legend that are from all over the world. Look at all these places around the world that match up with these different dragons. You know, you're not going to be able to read them all, but just take a look and see that there are dragons pictured all over the world. There's Quetzalcoatl in Mexico. He's a serpent dragon. And you can see a lot of them over here in Asia and in Europe as well. See, number 10 is this one, Celtic dragon, Wales. So they're all over the place. And if you find tales of something all over the world throughout much of time, you can pretty much assume it must exist, because they couldn't all come up with the same thing all over the world. All right, now I want us to, if we can, watch this video presentation. Which is still going around and around, so we may not be able to. Refresh again, see what happens. It says no internet. Wow, that's lovely. Well, the only thing we can do then is to proceed with what I was planning to do tomorrow, And then tomorrow, hopefully, we can come back and look at dinosaurs. So we'll be doing a little bit out of order here. So let's bring back our slides and we'll go from there. All right, so when we're looking at ancient history, we have a choice to make. We're going to look at it through biblical lens or through a secular lens, which does not believe in God. And it comes down to this. Is Adam in your past, or is there an ape in your past? You know, if Adam is in your past, then we have absolutes from God. God sets the rules. And so we have rules that don't change. They come from Him. If there's an ape in your past, then man sets the rules, and we have what's called relative morality. You choose based on whatever you feel like or whatever fits the situation. There are no absolutes. So, some will say, well, why is it that people don't want to believe in creation when it's so obvious? That's because they want to set the rules. They don't want to live by God's rules. But that's the choice. One thing that we find at the Creation Museum in Kentucky that Ken Ham has come up with is that he's divided all of history into 7 C's. And I'd like you to copy these down. The 7 C's of history. And you might find this on a quiz sometime. The 7 C's of history. You've probably heard about somebody sailing the 7 C's. Talking about S-E-A-S. Well, this is the 7 letter C's of history. And if you can remember this and put this in order, you'll have a designation that will bring up all of history. Okay, so the first C is creation. And you know that's the beginning, as we've talked before. The beginning of all history, the beginning of everything is creation. And then we have corruption. What do we mean by corruption? Or what was the corruption? What was the corruption? Bill?
The fall of man.
Right, the fall of man. And what does that mean? What does that involve, in case somebody doesn't know? Bill?
Adam and Eve ate the fruit from the tree they were not allowed to.
Right, and so what do we call that? Anybody else? What do we call when they ate from the tree they weren't supposed to?
The fall.
It's called the fall. Also,
Sin.
sin. And what sin was it? What? The first sin, so we call it
The first sin.
we have another word for it. If it's the first, it's the original. We call it original sin. That's the first sin of mankind, original sin. And of course that affected all of mankind ever since, right? So we had the corruption entering the world, and it got so bad that there was a catastrophe. What was the catastrophe? The flood, worldwide flood, which killed everybody but Noah and his family. How many people were there?
7.
8. 8 people, yeah. Each man had a wife. So they paired up. Just like the animals paired up, right? So you're thinking 7 besides Noah. That's what you're thinking, right? So we have a catastrophe. And following that, we have a time of confusion. Where was the confusion? Or what was confused? Tower of Babel. What was confused? Right, languages. This is where languages come from. We'll talk about that in more detail later. And then following confusion, we have a long period of time before we get to Christ. And of course, Christ comes into the world, and then he dies on the cross. That's the focal point of history, the cross, and then eventually the consummation. That means everything brought together, the finality of history. So these are the 7 C's: creation, corruption, catastrophe, confusion, Christ, cross, and consummation. Okay, everybody understand all of it? Any questions about any of the C's? Okay, what I'd like you to do is to learn those in order. So if I ask you, give me the 7 C's, you can do that. All right, now let's consider the beginning of everything. I wish I could show you this whole thing on one slide, but it's too long. But here we have Adam is beginning back in here, so you just have to take my word for it. He's back here at the beginning, Adam. And then, of course, in the first century, we have Cain and Abel. Then we have Seth carry on the godly line and follow him on. And in the third century, we have a guy by the name of Enos. We continue on the third century and the fourth century. And as you look up here in this chart, you can follow along some of the same people. And like I said before, we know what happened at the very beginning, and we have a lot of the names of the people as we go along through history. We can follow that all the way through, all the way down to, I think this chart goes to early 20th century, and if we could add more, we could keep going. Maybe probably not even carry it out to the edge of the wall there, but there's all of world history almost right there, and all the civilizations that came into being. So here's the very beginning. We have Adam and Seth, Enos, and then we move on into the 5th and 6th century. What do you notice here? These guys are still all going. You got Enoch in the 7th century. Do you remember Enoch? Anybody remember anything special about Enoch? What does it say about Enoch? It says Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. He never died, yeah. God just took him straight up to heaven to be with him. Well, look, Enoch starts here in the 7th century, but look, Adam and Seth and all these other guys are still living. And then we have Methuselah. Do you remember Methuselah?
Mm-hmm.
What's significant about Methuselah, Joel?
He lived the longest.
Right. Anybody remember how long?
960 years.
I was thinking 969, but I'm not sure. I might be off. So he's the one that lived the longest of anybody recorded in the Bible, at least. But look, these guys are all still alive. Adam is still alive. You probably never thought of that before. I never did until I was looking at this chart. You know, you go all the way down here in Methuselah, and Adam is still alive. Can you imagine? Talking with Adam. Adam's been around for 700 years. Can you imagine talking to somebody who's been around for 700 years? Or even Seth, 600 and some years? That would be remarkable, wouldn't it? You think old people have stories to tell? Adam, he's lived a long time. All right, so here's Methuselah. And finally Adam dies in the 10th century, 900 some years old. Seth finally dies. Some of these guys are dying. So what color was Methuselah? Orange. Okay, so Methuselah is born here. And then Noah's born. Noah's born not too far away from the time when Seth dies. So Noah certainly talks to people who talk to Adam. So that's pretty cool. So here's Noah. And they keep going. Here's Noah. There's Methuselah. Did we see who that was? No, you can see yellow. They keep going. They're there for a long time. And we'll take a break there and consider the Garden of Eden. In case there's anything you want to write down, I want to give you your notes because it starts with Eden. And I think I'm going to have to hand them to you one at a time. Whoops, wait a minute. Is there something missing there? There's a blank. These are going to be difficult. See, that's the whole. It is because they weren't. I forgot to tell them to staple it, and so purples. Let's put that in. Okay, here's the next one. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. Here's the next one. Next one.
Maybe smaller.
Mr. Henry,
Yes.
some feel thicker than others.
If you've got a thick one, go about halfway through and see if you find the first page. Maybe it's got a double. Okay. Did you get one of these yet? Okay. How many more do I need? Anybody doesn't have one?
I don't have.
Okay, everybody, if you got a
Never
thick
mind,
one?
never mind.
If you got a thick one, did you look through to see if you got a double?
I don't know.
Okay, as you can see, the first thing on your outline there is about Eden. So I want to just kind of briefly talk about the Garden of Eden. People want to know, where was it? Where is it? They want to find it today. Well, some of the best guesses are that it was over here, because the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are mentioned, which are here, that it must have been down at the base of those. This is now covered by water, and it's felt that it was here, now covered by water. The thing is that all this was covered by the flood anyway. So I'm not sure that we can say that even the Tigris and Euphrates rivers are in the same place that they were before, running out of the Garden of Eden. There are 4 rivers mentioned as running out of the Garden of Eden, and 2 of them are rivers we have today, and 2 of them are not. But were those rivers named Tigris and Euphrates because they're naming them after the rivers that were in Eden and have nothing to do with where they are located? Or did rivers run in roughly the same place that they did before the flood, which is kind of hard to imagine that that would be the case. So basically what I'm saying is nobody knows for sure where the Garden of Eden was. One thing we can be sure of, it no longer is, right? Because it was destroyed. All right, any questions about the Garden of Eden? All right, the next thing we're going to do is look at an item in the Bible in Genesis chapter 6. After the time of creation and the fall, you're all familiar with that, but there's something that comes up that there's a lot of confusion about, I think, in Genesis chapter 6. And because it'll take us a little while to go over that, I'm not going to start that today. So make sure you bring your Bibles tomorrow And we are going to look at what's called the sons of God in Genesis 6. How many of you know what that's talking about? Okay. Most of the time, people haven't even heard of this because their pastors or teachers skip over this chapter because it is kind of confusing. But we'll talk about that tomorrow. Any questions? Let's go back and see if we've got any film coming at all. Yes.
While we're waiting, can I check out one of the books for ship?
It's still not coming.